The other day we had our first snowfall of the year, and that always gets me excited to do a snow scene. Many years ago, I painted this old barn in Warwick, New York, not too far from my home in northern New Jersey. Although the barn is long gone, I still enjoy demonstrating from this photograph. We might assume that there's no color in snow and that you simply leave the paper white, but there's a lot more color than you think in both the light and shadow. In this video, we're going to paint a snow scene. In our first wash, we'll get lots of warm and cool tones into the sun-drenched snow. Then at the right moment, we'll put in a few soft-edged cast shadows falling across the ground. We'll paint in the trees using a script liner brush and suggest the massive sticks using a dry brush technique. Finally, we'll embrace gray and use it for the weathered wood in the old barn. Across the screen, you'll see a list of colors that we'll be using for this painting. Before you try this video, I suggest you watch it all the way through and then rewatch it as you paint, pausing as needed. I always like to start with a little inspiration from artists whom I admire. John Pike understood the importance of getting color into his snow scenes. Winter Formation is an illustration that appears in his how-to book, Watercolor, the art and technique of watercolor painting. In the book, he reveals that he always floats the full spectrum of color into his snow. If you look closely, you'll be able to see the play of red, yellow, and blue hues. I would assume that artists from cold climates would be experts at snow, and these two Russian artists don't disappoint. Andrei Yegorov painted this picture, Winter in the Village, in gouache, which is watercolor using white paint. I love the perspective in the tracks and the color that he got into his shadows. Notice that the upright planes in the snow are warm and light in value, while the top planes are a cool gray. Konstantin Gorbatov's watercolor, A Street in Winter, is loaded with color. The snow in the foreground looks lumpy, piled up, and full of texture. I also like how he handled all the sticks and the bare deciduous trees. They're painted as a group and not as individual branches. With these images in mind, let's begin. John Pike, the Woodstock, New York artist, wrote in one of his watercolor how-to books that whenever he painted a snow scene, he would start by wetting the entire sheet of paper, and then he would drop in spots of the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. He did that to kill the deadness of the pure white paper. I like that idea, and we're going to do the same, but we won't be so random. For example, areas of the snow that are receiving direct sunlight will have a warm golden wash of color. Areas of the snow that are a top plane and face the clear blue sky will have a very light wash of cobalt blue. For the distant snow in this area, we'll add a wash of cadmium scarlet, which will optically recede. Once these colors are in, roll the paper around to blend evenly. For the cooler sky planes on the snow, mix up a light wash of clean cobalt blue. Put this color over areas of the snow that are a top or a flat plane. Roll the paper around to blend evenly and to lighten the blue a little by pouring off the excess paint. The center of the snow-covered road has a cooler plane as well. I'm letting the blue color drip off in the same direction that I applied the paint, on a slight diagonal. Dry up the edges of the paper with a tissue to prevent a back run as it dries. Also, remove and reapply the bulldog clamps to even out the wet paper. Mix up a dark cobalt blue for the shadows that will fall across the foreground from the trees which are off to the left and out of view. The paper is still wet, but not saturated. It's at the moist stage of wetness, which means the shine has just disappeared. It's the perfect time to put in some soft edge shadows. Use a 1/4 inch flat brush to put in these shadows that fall across the snow. Although cast shadows are typically hard edged, in this case, the further away from the object that the cast shadow is, the softer it appears. As you paint these cast shadows, remember they're falling across a curvy surface, so try to follow the contours on the blanket of snow. These shadows are being cast from bare deciduous trees, so they will taper as they go across the foreground, make them thinner towards the right. A script liner brush is useful to paint in these narrow shapes. Include a few of the smaller and lesser branches that come off the major tree trunks. The soft edges created by the wet and wet technique really gives these shadows a feeling of space between the trees and their shadows. Reload often to maintain a dark blue shadow value. If you're too slow and the paper begins to dry, no worries. After all, it's a cast shadow and it can be hard edged too. Make these cast shadows nice and wavy in places to suggest the contours in the piled up snow. As long as the paper is still moist, you can revisit the shadows and make them slightly darker if you notice they're beginning to dry a little too light for a cast shadow. I don't think we can overdo the amount of sticks that are casting shadows from the trees. Before we put in the sky, be sure to dry the entire painting. The roof on the old barn has some snow on it, and because it's a little further back in the picture, we'll put a wash of cadmium red over it to make it recede. We'll also wet the entire sky area with a wash of cadmium red and alizarin crimson with a whole lot of water. We'll make it redder along the horizon and bluer along the top of the sky. Make sure the paper is good and wet and that you've covered all of it. Roll the paper around to blend the red evenly. Looks like I missed a spot in the upper right hand corner. Now roll it around again to blend evenly. Load up a large 3/4 inch flat brush with some cobalt blue and some Winsor blue and drop this color in along the top edge of the sky. Stop the blue color just short of the snow that's on top of the barn's roof. We want that snow to look like it's receiving a warm light from the sun. Roll the board around again to blend the washes nice and evenly, and then pour off the excess paint and water. I'm going to intensify the blue color because it looks a little too light along the top. Note that my paper is still very wet, saturated in fact. Wipe up the excess paint under the clamps and along the edges of the paper. And once again, roll the paper around to blend everything evenly. Because I'm using 140-pound paper, it's buckling and causing the wash to have an unevenness to it. I'll remove the clamps to even out the paper. Lift up the top edge to get a nice progression from dark to light towards the horizon. And roll the paper around once more to get a nice even blend throughout the sky. Once we're satisfied with the sky, we can reclamp it to the paper so that it lies flat. Pull the paper tight as you reclamp, just like you're stretching a canvas.